These are the texts from the Common Lectionary for Easter Sunday, which is March 31st this year, or just about as early, not quite as early, but almost as early as Easter can possibly be. And I'm not going to share all the texts. There are a slew of texts that could be utilized for Easter. Obviously, the principal four texts would be the gospel accounts of the resurrection. This year, in Lectionary Year B, it is my favorite text, which is the one from Mark. But I'm thinking of pairing a trio of texts this year. I'm not sure I'm going to pull that off yet, but I'm seeing some fascinating elements that I think can be connected. And maybe if you're one of those that watch these videos that likes to look at them in advance, if you let these sift through in your head over this particular week of Holy Week that is coming up, maybe you'll see some ties between the three, as I think I am seeing now. So the three texts that I'm going to share with you today, the first one is from Isaiah chapter 25, verses 6 through 9. It is a fairly traditional text that's used from the Old Testament at funerals. I'm going to flesh out that text a little bit for you because in its own way it's a precursor to the resurrection. Another way to look at the text, it is a good example of revelation in the way that God utilizes specific people in their own time and place, in their own cultural context, in order to share true revelation from above. God is always using us in our moment of history. God is always speaking to us in our moment of history. And I think that this text will suggest the same thing. So let's begin with that text. It is, again, it's one that's used often at funerals. It speaks of a banquet that will take place one day on Mount Zion. And the text in those three verses talks about the richest of foods. So it really is this lush, elaborate, celebratory moment. But there's a key significance here, which is beyond Jewishness, we might say. The text says, all peoples will be drawn to this banquet. Now that is clearly something that we see in revelational process in the New Testament after the resurrection of Jesus. And we're going to get to that in the Acts text. But here already in this ancient time, this notion of all peoples being gathered at Mount Zion for this feast that the Lord is providing, and all these rich foods and wines, things that, well, like our own Thanksgiving dinner, we don't do that very often. And so this is a rich feast that is a moment of gratitude, of festivity, of thanksgiving, all of those things that we put together in our finest moments that we celebrate with family and friend. But there's more to the text than that. The text says that the Lord will swallow up death forever, that he will lift the veil or the shroud from all peoples as well. Probably this lifting of the veil or the lifting of the shroud is that image in that particular day and time that when there was a death, a person put on mourning clothes to indicate that this was a period of sorrow and sadness, and it was not like any other period. And that's going to be lifted, that it becomes a permanent lifting occurs again, I think, and this is a reach into the contemporary culture of the time of the development of this text. This swallowing up death is an allusion, I think, very likely to the Canaanite god of death, Mot. We would spell that in our language, M-O-T, Mot. And in the Canaanite culture, and keep in mind that whole region had been a Canaanite cultural enclave. Every spring, Mott died. So think of what happens in winter when things go dormant and the flowers and plants don't grow. It's like a little death. And so every spring, Mott was defeated, but not swallowed up and devoured and eradicated. Mott would always rule again next winter. Well, this is taking that image of the repetition of death and saying there is a moment coming in time where all of that death is wiped away permanently, swallowed, devoured, digested, gotten rid of. That's what the Lord is going to do. And then there will be no tears. Tears are gone. All of the, oh, I wish it were better than this. Oh, I can't wait for spring. Or, oh, how I miss my loved one who has died. All of that's wrapped up in these few verses with this imagery of a time of great feasting, no more death, and joy, peace, celebration becoming the permanent status of humankind. God is not considered by this revelation an entity. God is simply a reality of humanity. Again, a sense of revelation that is not some outside source. It's just part of our context in this world that will be completely transformed by the Lord in a particular moment in time of the Lord's own choosing. So a wonderful, powerful sense of a different reality yet to be. Now, I'm trying to decide, even as I'm talking right now, I think I'm going to go ahead and do the gospel text, and then we'll do the Acts text. Usually we save the gospel for a little later on, but I'm going to do the gospel. I said this was my favorite text about the resurrection, and maybe I will explain why here in a minute. It's the shortest text, and it ends, well, almost as a new beginning. That's probably a good way to put it. It is Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. And the best way for me to talk about the text, I think, is to jump straight to the very end of the text. Let's see. Okay. In verse 5, the women come, the stone has been rolled away. There's a young man, according to the text, dressed in a white robe, sitting there. They're alarmed, and he says to them, "Don't be alarmed." That's sort of an allusion, I think, to how often when there's an angelic appearance, there is the response of, "Don't be afraid." You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He's been raised. He's not here. And then the key elements here at the end. Go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him as he told you. So they went out from the tomb, fled from the tomb, it says, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. End of the text. Now, in about the 2nd century, there were additions added. Now, there are some scholars that think that the oldest existing text of Mark was worn and so worn out that maybe the original ending was lost. But there are plenty of other scholars that say, no, this was the original ending. This was Mark's intended ending. I happen to believe that. Where does the initiative continue for revelation, for the spread of the gospel? The initiative continues to be with God himself. Or we might say the initiative continues to be with Jesus. So there's no resurrection appearance at the end, The women don't do what the young man in a dazzling white robe has told them to do. Go tell Peter and the rest what you have seen. They flee and tell no one. And so then we wait with the question in our minds and hearts, well, if they don't tell anyone, how is the gospel spread? The gospel is spread by a revelation that only Jesus himself is able to provide. Some of the other gospels talk about that. Mark ends here to leave us deliberately wondering about the permanent spread of the gospel. And isn't that in reality really true, that the permanent spread of the gospel, even when it falls to us, isn't by our own power. It is by the power of Christ. And I say that with a genuine sense of it is Christ's power, not our own. I've often been amazed at what, in my own preaching, the things that people hear and will respond to me and say, what you said last Sunday or whenever was so potent to me. And sometimes I say, well, what did I say? And when they say to me what they think they heard, it's often far more profound than anything that I wrote down when I was preparing a sermon. So I find that often to be something to marvel at. The other marvel that's similar for me is how often I have gone in the pulpit going, oh man, this is a real dog of a sermon. To have people come out and say, that really touched me. And I'm going, oh, I don't know how, because I almost was embarrassed to walk into the pulpit with it. So that to me is very similar to this. The fact that these cowards who ran away, these women who fled in fear, the gospel continues to be spread. And we have inklings of this before this very end of the text. So staying in here in Mark, let's just back up just a trace. A Roman centurion witnessing the resurrection, witnessing the crucifixion. A Roman centurion says, truly, this was a son of God. Whoa! Not the disciples saying it, although Peter said it back in Mark's chapter 8 at the end. A Roman centurion has no reason to say it. But in the experience of the Christ on the cross, he says this was a son of God. Whoa! How about that? Also, the women witness the crucifixion from afar. The disciples have all fallen away already. And Joseph of Arimathea asks for the body so that he can observe in honor of the body a traditional way of Jewish burial, which is very important to the Jewish people of that time. Now, what's so key about Joseph of Arimathea? He is, in fact, part of the council that condemned Jesus to death. So we have insiders, the women, the disciples, who rush away, outsiders, the centurion, and Joseph of Arimathea, who honor the Christ. A complete reversal of reality, or we might say another hint that revelation is not dependent upon our loyalty and our faithfulness. I think that's a very powerful thing. I hope you perceive the same thing. The last text is for Easter Sunday is from Acts chapter 10. A short section here. I would commend to you that you read the more lengthy section about Peter and Cornelius. This is just Peter's sermon to Cornelius. Often when I'm getting ready to prepare for a sermon and I look at texts that have been provided in a lectionary, I do ask the question, how do these texts inform each other. And I do want to suggest to you that while the resurrection is central for us, or as Mark might say, the cross is central to interpreting the resurrection. I might say here that the resurrection is central to interpreting this text from Acts. This is the account of Peter, a Jewish man, now clearly a devout evangelist of the Christ. And our text is just his sermon. A quick aside about the sermon. The sermon in its own brief setting here pretty much follows the structure of the book of Mark. It doesn't begin with a nativity. It begins with the baptism with John the Baptist. And it bounces quickly through the life of Jesus. But that's not the important part here. The important part to me is the revelation that has occurred to Peter. He has this dream about things that are clean and unclean to eat, and at the end it becomes clear to him that nothing God has created is unclean. Then there's the knock at the door, and there are people seeking someone to come and talk to Cornelius. Again, all of this is pre our text today. Our text is just that sermon, a very brief part. But when Peter goes to Cornelius, who is a Roman military man, there's something that escapes our minds in our modern American life. When the text says in Acts, again before the text, that before our text today, that Peter steps across the threshold into the house of Cornelius. That's amazing, because to step across the threshold of Goyim, of Gentiles, of those that should be considered by Jews unclean, is not to be allowed. Peter steps across the threshold and into the house of a person like this, because the revelation of Christ to him is that God don't make no junk, as some bumper sticker used to say years ago. That these people who are not like Peter are still a part of that kingdom that one day will be on Mount Zion for this feast to which the Lord has invited all people. A stunning thing. So we have the Isaiah text where all people will one day be celebratory together of the Lord that wipes away death. We have the gospel text where it is outsiders who have some inkling about the potency of this Christ, whom his disciples and even the women who watch from afar flee in fear. And then this moment at the end where Peter understands that the gospel can be spread and is called by Christ to be spread everywhere, that not a single threshold to any home is prohibited when it comes to sharing the good news of Jesus. That's our Easter Sunday morning. That's the story of the cross and the resurrection. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll look forward to sharing again with you next week. Happy Easter.